Hello and welcome Exiles to my self-chill Lightning Strike Berserker. Now I hesitate to say Lightning Strike because frankly this build will work with any claw skill you can use, it'll work great. And also I hesitate to say Berserker because there's also a Juggernaut version that I will have information on, which pretty much just says, hey, if you want a little less speed, a little less damage, but a lot more tank, there's a Jugg version for the build. Now, this character, it does it all. Normally in Path of Exile, when I'm making characters, I don't get to choose speed, damage, and tank. I have to choose 2 out of the 3. That's usually a rule you kind of have to follow. But this character kind of breaks that rule. It does it all, and it does it all well. I've made some pretty good builds this league, and this build, I think, by far and away, is my best build. The Relic of the Pack character, it had a good amount of speed, and it had more damage technically than this character, but ultimately, it was slower and had a lot less consistency in terms of defenses, considering you could randomly get one shot. This character can't. And on top of that, this character is much faster. I also would say this character is probably less currency to put together than the Relic of the Pack build. We'll see if that remains that case, if items get more expensive, but ultimately, the key items for this build are relatively cheap uniques, and you should be able to get this going with some reasonable amount of expense if you follow my information in the guide section about gearing. This character is one of a kind. I'm really happy with how it turned out. So hopefully you guys can enjoy my basically breakdown of how this character works in game. Let's go in game and check it out. Now that we're in game, let's go over the core concepts for what make this character tick. It starts off with basically 4 items I'm using here. 4 uniques, 4 key pieces, so to speak. It's pretty simple. Eternal Apple is a unique that says, hey, when you get to maximum endurance charges, I'm going to remove your endurance charges and cast a warcry skill. If you pair this one item with something like Enduring Composure, which says, hey, if you've been hit recently, you gain an endurance charge every second. If you pair it with this and some self-damage, something like Echoes of Creation, which says, hey, if you exert an attack, I'm going to hit you with damage. This will create a loop where you use an attack, you proc damage on yourself, proccing Enduring Composure, proccing this. This then procs War Cries, which then continue the loop. So, with these 3 items, we have constant War Cries being procced thanks to our self-damage from Echoes of Creation and Eternal Apple. We then pair this with CDR to our War Cries on the tree, and we pair it with some additional Warcry exerts, stuff like that, to get it feeling smooth and consistent. That way, when we have these items on, our Warcry's cooldown is around 3 seconds, roughly speaking, which is about the time frame you want it to be when it comes to the Warcries proccing on a regular basis with some consistency to get that extra damage. Now, this also pairs nicely with items such as Call the Void and Winterweave. Because we exert attacks that deal damage to ourselves, we can then turn that damage into speed. This is done via Call the Void, which makes all that damage able to chill us. Now, when we have multiple Warcries exert an attack and we chill ourselves, we will then reverse that chill for more speed. So, between these 4 items, we're generating self-chill speed, we're generating high uptime on good Warcries that improve our damage and our quality of life with Ancestral Cry, extra strike range, extra strikes, more clear, stuff like that, and then also extra damage from Echoes of Creation. This gets even better when we pair it with mechanics like Doppelganger's Guise, for example. It says, hey, when you hit yourself, we're going to regen 10% life per second. It also gives us a way to start mitigating that fizz damage a bit. You pair that with Determination for some armor, and then you combine that for my personal favorite setup, which is Berserker using the Untiring cluster from the Juggernaut node. That means all the physical damage we're mitigating, we are then regenning. This means even though we're dealing a lot of self-damage to ourselves, we're actually sustaining more than we're dealing to ourselves, and we're actually getting a net positive on regen. On top of that, we have a character that has life gain on hit and leech, so our sustain mechanics are really solid. Now this gets even better when you consider the fact you can use things like Replica Hot-Headed for more speed, or things like, hey, Berserk, I want good uptime on Berserk. Berserk is a mechanic that gives us a lot of speed and a lot of damage. What does that pair nicely with? That pairs nicely with things like Warbringer and Crave the Slaughter. This means our character has very high uptime on Berserk and we are just zooming. We're moving at light speed. So that's kind of the core uniques we have in the build, and that's what we're building around. Those are our building blocks. From there, the foundation of the build is Nightblade is overpowered. I'm going to use a claw, and I'm going to be able to use basically any claw skill I want. Ultimately, this character started out as Wild Strike, and I YOLO double corrupted a Lightning Strike all quality because, you know, I just wanted a YOLO one, and I hit 2120 Val, which I took as a sign that, hey, you know what? I can be a meta cuck for once. I'll use this skill that was gifted, this gem that was gifted to me. Ultimately, you can use any other skill. You don't have to use Lightning Strike. It's just simply the one that deals the most damage because Lightning Strike hits twice because that's fair and balanced. Now, that being said, say you can't afford the all quality anomalous Lightning Strike. I think I should include this here. I would recommend bench crafting on a pierce on your gloves, basically work around trying to make gloves where you have an extra bench craft open on the prefix and you can get one pierce there. If that doesn't feel like enough pierce, you can also get a pierce enchant instead of a berserk enchant for more feels good clear if that's what you're into. Ultimately, those sorts of choices are up to you. Now, when it comes to crafting the rare gear, as you can see, our uniques are cheap. They are random uniques that aren't really worth that much on the market. Clearly, our building blocks aren't going to be too expensive, but the rares, these are where you get to add in a lot of cost if you want to min-max. Obviously, with doing this Enduring Composure setup, you need to get +2 minimum endurance charges. Now, crafting one of these amulets does require Kalandra crafting. If you are on the budget end of this build, I will recommend just getting an amulet that has like life, crit multi, maybe elemental damage with attacks, you know, just some normal stats, but instead of going for Kalandra crafting, you simply anoint this endurance charge node here and not forces of nature. This is a little bit of a DPS loss, but it makes your amulet way cheaper to craft and it takes away the most expensive piece and makes it a cheap piece on the build. Another thing you can do is just go for a more budget Kalandra craft, so that's kind of up to you on how you want to approach that. Other things I would consider when crafting these gear, I go into extensive detail in the POB notes section to try to give you a good idea on what things to shoot for if you're going for early, mid, or high budget. Definitely follow these principles. Consider what kind of budget you're looking for. If you don't have a lot of currency to work with, definitely look at the early budget recommendations on all these sorts of things. The moral of the story is this build can be done on a budget. The main thing you're going to be losing if you say, for example, the difference between high and early budget really is the difference in having 100% spell suppress and 80% spell suppress. It's a matter of dropping suppress rolls on your gear. That makes the gear crafting much more affordable. Stuff like that is a doable loss. You're still going to be able to wipe the content. It's going to be a little bit more sketchy. You're probably going to run a few different deaths when you do uber bosses sort of situation, but the build will still be able to stomp the content. Now, that's for these pieces here. When it doesn't quite feel as much of a defense loss, but more of a DPS loss, we're talking about our claw. For the claw craft, it's pretty simple. You're going to be changing out an Imperial Fractured Claw for something like a Gemini Claw or one of a Noble Claw. Basically, you're getting a worse base with a little bit of less attacks per second or a little bit less base fizz damage. You're going to look for a fracture of fire, cold, lightning, or maybe attack speed, and you're just going to essence spam till you hit something decent sort of situation to save on money. My claw ultimately could be much better, but frankly, I also cheaped out on the claw too, and I only ended up spending, I don't know, 6-7 divines or something like that. I didn't go too extensive into my claw. I tried to keep it cheap. I tried to keep it reasonable. Now, that hopefully gives you a good idea of what you can expect for gearing cost in terms of what's on the character. Outside of gearing cost on the character, we do want to end up spending a little bit on our gear for our cluster jewels. I think I spent a couple divines on both of my cluster jewels, which was simply trying to get fuel the fight and martial prowess, along with martial prowess and feed the fury. These are the kind of jewels that help us get our accuracy capped, as well as help us get leech for both mana and life in the build. Without any form of mana leech, you will not sustain casting the skill. So frankly, if you can't get these sorts of level of clusters, you have Clever Thief right here. You're going to have to spend 2 passive points, and you're going to have to drop some power elsewhere on the build. That being said, you will save a lot on Cluster Jewels if you don't have to buy Feed the Fury and Fuel the Fight, but something to look forward to if you want to min-max the character. Speaking of Cluster Jewels, we have some very important things to talk about. Mob mentality and lead by example. This is going to be one warcry cluster you do not want to miss. It gives you permanent sustain on your frenzy and power charges because of how many war cries we are triggering, and on top of that, it also gives you onslaught permanently. This is a crazy amount of value for 4 passives. Do not pass it up. Another thing you want is you want Secrets of Suffering in the build. The way we've set this up, we've gone for Anger as our offensive aura to make it so we can get pretty good basically scorches while still getting good crit and sap for more defenses. Secrets of Suffering, pretty strong, still very, very much worth it. And then of course, an Enduring Composure cluster. If you're on the cheap end, you want to go for a small cluster and not a Megalomaniac, but when you start min-maxing a little bit, Megalomaniac is strictly superior to a small cluster in my opinion. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what to look for on clusters. Oh, before I stop on clusters, pressure points, Basics of Pain. This is going to be the most expensive min-max version of the crit cluster. Really, you can just go for something like Provocateur or Eye of the Storm instead of Basics of the Pain, and it takes it from a 1 divine cluster to a 10 seed cluster. So if you want to save some money, there you can save budget as well. Another thing I should mention is I have an int problem with my current gearing. I have to spend something like 30 int node right here. Ultimately, if you roll int on one of these other pieces around here, say you're doing a more budget version of the build, you don't care about suppress, and you get a pair of boots with int on it, that will save you some passive points here, and you won't have to, for example, have int rolled on your small cluster. Stuff like that. It'll free up some gearing, allow you to spend some points elsewhere on the character. I should also mention that we are taking the 10 minimum power charge, or not 10 minimum power charge, 10 minimum power warcry node. This gives consistency to our warbringer, giving us 20 rage every time we're under that 25 rage threshold, and that ping-pongs us back and forth between the under 25 and above 25 rage, and also gives us good rage uptime. I think I've covered most of the key elements on the tree except for Traitor Keystone. This is something where I started out with Divine Flesh. I then did a setup where I wanted to do with Traitor Keystone, and there's basically some pros and cons to both setups. With Doppelgangers, guys, I actually think the superior min-max setup is probably with Divine Flesh, but the thing about doing that is it's hard to cap your res when you do that. You have to try even harder to make min-max gear. So ultimately what happened is I switched to Traitor Keystone, I changed with some gear pieces, and all of a sudden, if I try to switch back to Divine Flesh, I'll have a res problem, and I don't really want to recraft more gear. So Traitor Keystone is great if you want to just have easily capped resistances. It feels good. All you have to really do is spend 3 notables here for these flash charge nodes, go for flasks that have reduced charges used or charge recovery, and you will have pseudo-permanent uptime if you're playing the game. If you go AFK for a minute, these flasks will eventually run out, but in all Voss fights, basically, you should have permanent uptime, and they should be just fine with this setup here and only 1 empty flask. So the play is Divine Flesh, a little bit tankier, but this Traitor Keystone, it's easier to cap your res, it's cheaper to get going, and you can get some good affixes. Like, for example, on this one, I have a lot of LE damage, I have Aura Effect, I have Life, I have Progeny. This one is actually really good now that I think of it. But frankly, you can get good jewels like this too. I just look up like Timeless Jewel Calculator, check the notables you're going to play, and then check affixes you need. Say you need Cold Res, say you need Dex, say you need whatever you need. Double damage, onslaught on kill, stuff like that. Well, don't go for onslaught on kill. We already have onslaught here. You don't need onslaught on kill. But you get the point. You can get pretty good Balbala jewels, and this will make the build capping res very easily on your gearing pressure. So hopefully I've gone over the basics of the passive tree. Let's go into the Ascendancy choice. This is something I want to talk about a little bit more in depth because there are multiple variations you can go. There is a Berserker variant, which is what we're doing, and this is the version I prefer most on the build. I think it's the most well-rounded between speed, damage, and defense, where you grab Warbringer, Aspect of Carnage, Crave the Slaughter, and Rite of Ruin. Pretty simple put, Aspect of Carnage, big damage. Right, Warbringer, mandatory for the build. It's how we have really good rage uptime, along with a lot of our attacks get 50% more damage because we basically always have sacrificed rage recently with this node, and the majority of our attacks have some form of exert, whether it's Intimidating Cry, Battle Mage's Cry, Ancestral Cry, or Rallying Cry. Usually our attacks have one of those war cries up, and that's a big damage boost. Not to mention you have things like Crave the Slaughter for better rage uptime, and then Rite of Ruin just means, depending on how much rage we have, which it fluctuates a lot, we get some nice bonuses, some nice boost to it, and this I decided was my preferred notable. You might also be able to go for something like Flawless Savagery, but I still think Rite of Ruin is probably the play. Now, when you go this setup, you want to go for either one of two things. Untiring is my preferred because it means when I go and I proc this self damage, when I'm doing this, I'm getting sustained. Oh, I don't have my determination, so I'm not actually mitigating the damage appropriately. Point is, when you're doing this with Untiring, you actually get a bunch of like regen, which ends up sustaining your self damage. If you want to go for a tankier version of the build that can't attack enemies when there's no enemies, sorry, I should say that can't do thing like you can't proc your warcry self damage if there isn't an enemy nearby, for example, but you're ultimately gonna be a bit tankier, you can go for unbreakable jewels with a brass dome. This is going to convert your 15k armor into something like I want to say it's going to be like 50-60k armor roughly. Let me slot them in. I can't remember 100%. You go to like 50k armor, proc your war cries, whatever they are, and of course I don't have my lightning strike, so I can't proc my intimidating cry and stuff, but point is, you get a decent amount of armor in this setup, and then you get the additional, basically, pseudo-transcendence on your elemental pool. It is very tanky, but it has the issue of, if you start attacking when there aren't enemies around you, we don't have a bunch of regen, because we lost our regen. We had regen from doppelgangers, we had regen from Untiring, and this means now there will be situations where you end up PKing yourself when you can't hit an enemy for leech or life gain on hit. Most of the time it doesn't happen, but ultimately I felt since it was inconsistent and I would randomly kill myself, I didn't like that. I like Untiring more with doppelgangers, guys, personally. Also, it is significantly cheaper. Brass Dome is an expensive chest in comparison to doppelgangers, guys. And on top of that, Unbreakable is an expensive node, whereas Untiring was relatively affordable at the time of me buying it. After this video, it might not be so affordable. That being said, there is a Juggernaut variant that I've talked about. The trade-off is you're going to lose Aspect of Carnage, which is a 40% damage loss. You lose out on the extra damage taken. That just makes you tankier. So you lose big damage from this node. You lose out on consistent rage uptime. But what do you get in the Juggernaut variant? Instead, you get to have both Untiring and Unbreakable along with a Brass Dome setup, so you're way tankier, and you get a bit better time on capping your accuracy with the accuracy node, and you don't really have to deal with slows and stuff thanks to the Unstoppable node. It has a more consistent, solid, defensively, I don't want to die package at the cost of damage. So you can also do that and grab Warbringer nodes. Say Untiring nodes get expensive, then you can go this route. You can go Juggernaut, grab Warbringer nodes, these are also pretty cheap, and go with Brass Dome. You'll lose a little bit of damage, you'll pick up a hell of a lot of defense, and that's kind of the trade-off there. So those are kind of your options for Ascendancy. I figured I would spell them all out. I've tried multiple different versions. My favorite version is this one with Doppelgangers, but Juggernaut version with Warbringer is pretty solid, and so is the Berserker version with Unbreakable and Brass Dome. Those are decent options as well. So hopefully that gives you guys a good idea of what the Ascendancy nodes work, how the tree breaks down, how the gearing works down, and how the basically the build works. Now, simply put, let's go into gem links real quick. I have here an Arrogance Precision. This is a matter of I had a hard time getting my accuracy capped. Accuracy capped is very important because it checks twice for 1, hitting the enemy, and 2, critting the enemy. If you are not accuracy capped on a crit based build, you are making a huge mistake, and ultimately I felt like it was worth it to drop about 8% of my EHP pool. The character's still very tanky, to fix that accuracy problem and also help fix our crit as well, because I was a little bit under crit capped for the build. It's a little bit of a sacrifice of a life pool, but the character's tanky enough it can handle to lose that EHP, and it just smooths out our accuracy so much easier. Now, this is something where, say you can't get an enchant for accuracy while you have Onslaught, for example. This character right now has 3700 accuracy. When I proc my Warcry, that goes up to accuracy capped because of my enchant. Say you can't afford that enchant, it's not the end of the world to go over and grab a precision level. See if I have a level 21, for example, just to show you the comparison here. If I were to grab a precision level 21, you'll see we're basically at accuracy cap with precision level 21 without the extra accuracy from my belt. That's just another example of, say you can't afford the enchant. If the enchant gets expensive, here's a solution for you. If you can't afford the enchant, then I would recommend running a lower level precision. That way you don't reserve as much life pool. You can see it's the difference in reserving 300 life versus reserving 400 life. You know, we get a little bit of more EHP if you're min-maxing, stuff like that. You can calculate it out. So that'll give you a good idea on why I'm running precision here. Also, this is something I never even used. I put it on just because, hey, it's 20% more damage if I actually remember to click the button. But this is something I would use if you don't have wild focus, because I have a W key here, which is basically, hey, do I want to deal more damage? You could prop this warcry or this totem down for, you know, faster attack speed or whatever. That's kind of up to you. I was struggling to figure out what I wanted to do exactly for my sockets. This was one of the options for more damage. There's other options, like maybe you want to panic cry. Maybe you want to put enduring cry just for a panic button for extra sustain. That's another option you could go for. Stuff like that. I wasn't sure about this gem slot here. Other stuff on the build, we have Enlightened support level 3 with Determination and Anger. If you get a mana reservation helmet, then you can probably drop Enlightened and go for something else. Also, we have Molten Shell. That's basically just, hey, I'm about to take damage. I want a little bit of extra tank in the build. I pop Molten Shell. It's an extra 3,000 HP, basically doubling our one-hit threshold. I don't have it ticked in POB because I think it just inflates POB numbers, but it's a way to make it so you can take a bigger max hit. Also, for gem links, Intimidating Cry, Ancestral Cry, and Rallying Cry, you want these all in the apple, and I would recommend getting the alt qualities for... Did I even remember? No, you don't need all qualities for Ancestral, and no, you don't need all qualities at all. Never mind. Just get level 21 20 gems or 20 gems, whatever's cheap and affordable. The levels on Warcries don't make too much of a difference, so don't spend a huge amount of money if the 21 gems get expensive. Just get 20 gems. They don't make that much of a difference, frankly. The difference between level 1 gems and level 20 gems are pretty minute. I'm pretty sure of that. Now, other gem setups, we are using all quality Battle Mage's Cry for the Warcry speed, linked to Enhance, Withering Step, and Assassin's Mark. The way this works is Battle Mage's Cry is how you proc your initial Warcry to mean when you exert you're going to deal self damage, and it starts the loop with Eternal Apple. It also means it's just something that I recommend procking every now and then, because that extra Battle Mage's Cry is also going to proc your Assassin's Mark on the boss, giving you crit and crit multi, and a little bit of increased damage if you can get the all quality, which is pretty big. And then on top of that, Withering Step is something you need to reset your Nightblade, and this just automates that process so you don't have to have another keybind for it, because you want to be Warcrying anyways, and that's why I'm using Battle Mage's Cry here. Other setups we have are Enhanced linked to Blood Rage, Shield Charge, and Berserk. This just gives a bit more damage, a bit more speed, and a bit more attack speed from Blood Rage. Frankly, Blood Rage, I think in all the clips I showed today, I think I forgot to use it, so I was just missing 20% increased attack speed. It's on another keybind I have. No, I took it off that keybind. I guess I forgot to put it back on my, basically the button on the side of my mouse. I forgot about it. So all the showcase I did here was without Blood Rage, which would have just been 26% attack speed, but I forgot about it. Not important, it's fine. We don't need that attack speed. Hopefully that breaks down the gem links we're going for. And then for the main skill, it's Lightning Strike, Trinity Support, Anomalous Nightblade, Awaken Added Lightning, Awakened Ellie, and Divergent Inspiration. The only one of these skill or links I would change is potentially Awaken Added Lightning, depending on what claw you make, depending on your setup for the build. If you can't afford Awakened Added Lightning, Ellie Pen is a great support, or Awakened Added Cold is a good support. It really just kind of depends what your claw ends up like. Say you have too much lightning damage and you're bricking your Trinity, maybe you need to do Awakened Added Cold to make your Trinity not bricked, or you get the point. Point is, Awakened Added Lightning I think is the best here because it gives you a little bit more base damage on your Lightning Strike, and the flat lightning has a wide range, so it works well, but you have other options. That's the supports. Awaken Ellie, that's what you need for Reflect Immune. Until you get a level 5 of this, you can't run Reflect maps. And then Inspiration, I don't think you need Divergent. I would test it without, probably test it with Anomalous. Anomalous is more damage, I believe. I don't think we need this in order to sustain casting the skill because of how much we're getting from Leech. So that's something I would test out, and maybe you can optimize a little bit more than I did here. Now, hopefully I have covered the works of this character. I've explained it well. In short, I like this character a lot. I don't know if that's coming through or not. It's a very fun, very basically versatile character. It can do it all. Hopefully this is a build you guys enjoy as much as I do here. The only downsides I can really think of is it's a character that doesn't work well for leveling and it's a character that has war cries going off a lot. So if you don't like listening to the war cry sound, that could be a downside for you. But ultimately, this is one of those characters that I don't see too many downsides on, and there's a lot of things I like about it. Hopefully in the description of this character, I break down a lot of your options here between stuff, and I explain stuff well. The main thing you're going to have to figure out yourself is leveling, because I'm going to only include a tree to level 70, because frankly this build just doesn't work until you get a lot of the key items on, and the key items are, for example, I think this is level 68 helmet, for example, and you need that for the build to function, and the build is just stretched so awkwardly thin that until you get to a higher level, I just would recommend leveling something else, is all I'm going to say on that. Now, we're going to conclude this video. I have some showcases of doing some Uber bosses just to say, hey, this is Uber boss viable. I did an Uber Maven's Elder, and I did an Uber Sirus. So those are some of the hardest possible fights you can do in the game, just to give you an idea. Hey, I'm not lying when I say this build can do the hardest content in the game, on top of doing just crushing maps and being a fast character. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. Take care, Exiles.
Do something. Dissect it. Smear to go. Resist the assault. Temporal tears. Struggle or strangle. Grasp your mortality tightly. Grip of the infinite. Straddle, strangle. Grasp your mortality tightly. Time's experience. Grip of the infinite. Struggle or strangle. That's my will. Resist the assault. Struggle or strangle. Time bends to my will. Grip of the infinite. Resist the assault. Time bends to my will. Grip of the infinite. Struggle or strangle. Time bends to my will. Grasp your mortality tightly. A riveting battle.
A real talent. You finally caught my attention.
This city is nothing.
claimed reliance on them.
I'm not so foolish.
Why run? What's the point? Glorious waves! Fury of the cosmos! Pointless! Be utterly annihilated! Rain of stars!
Really interesting enough to warrant all this pain.
Your lives are meaningless! Why resist? Glorious waves! Fury of the cosmos!
You yet see the futility of your efforts.
There is only horror. Obliteration!
Why do you insist on continuing to exist?
There is only horror. Why run? What's the point? Fury of the cosmos! Obliteration! Be utterly annihilated!